Hi, I'm Breadman, the creator of the GM Ghost Hunt series. I'm going to tell you how I made the ghost detector, simply because I keep getting inboxed about it and it's driving me fucking mad. So, it's quite a simple concept, but it is complicated, and it really is resource heavy on the source engine, especially if you've got a ton of this shit going on in your map. So, I'm going to cut straight to it. I'll tell you how I made it first, and then I'll explain how it works. So you've got a physics prop which you can pick up. I chose that deliberately because pressing E is much better than having a noisy gravity gun whilst you're walking around the map. You're trying to absorb the sounds and everything. So a physics prop that you can pick up, something nice and light, something like this. It's just like a little lab instrument. I don't know. It kind of looks cool, fits the part. And what I did is I got a bunch of sprites and I parented them to said prop, bit like that. And the sprites are numbered 1 to 5. You've also got a default one on there that always stays on because, you know, immersion and shit. So 1 to 5 sprites which are parented to the physics prop, and that's basically the first step. That's what you want to get. So you want to get a physics prop that you can pick up with sprites parented to it. It doesn't have to be 5, it could be as many as you like. The next thing you want to do is sort out your sounds. So find some nice beepy noises like that. Create an ambient generic, give it a name, tell it to play. Well, actually, really important part of this is this bit down here, source entity name. You can tell sounds in the source engine to come from an entity as long as you're not spawning it through a template or something. And the ghost detector in my maps isn't spawned from a template, it's already there. So you can tell the noises that you create here to come from the prop itself. So that means that when you're carrying it around, it'll always make noises properly. So that's quite important. I think I have 2 noises. Yeah, so you've got that one for when it's finding a ghost, and then you've got that one when you're about to get butt raped. So 2 noises there, nice and simple. They come from the prop. You do it that way. It's easy. So once you've got that done, you want to set up sort of like an array of triggers like this. Now, you could probably just clone and create one trigger and then clone it. This is where it gets complicated. These are trigger multiples, and they use the on end touch and on start touch outputs basically to hide or show the corresponding sprite on the detector. So this is the first trigger, as you can see in our array or radius, right? If you were, so if I move the player start or the suit, let me move the suit into the center. Assume that that is the ghost, and what we would do in the environment is we would parent these triggers to the ghost and it would move around with it. But so back to the triggers. For our first trigger, if you will, and I'll only explain this one, you want to make it so that when that prop is touching the trigger, it shows one of the sprites, so the first sprite on it. And you need to specify what happens when the prop stops touching that trigger as well. So we say on end touch and on start touch, show and hide. So when it starts to touch the brush, the trigger brush, you want to show the sprite, and when it's not touching, you want to hide it. And we also put in a trigger in there to trigger the beep. This is where it gets a bit more complicated, because then you would duplicate that trigger and make it smaller, and then you would do the same for sprite 2 and 3 and 4 until you've got all the sprites. Because these triggers are contained within themselves, this is the bit that threw my friend when I tried to explain this to him. You don't have to make, so for example in our center trigger, you don't have to put an output for every single sprite, because that trigger brush is inside the other trigger brush, which is inside the other trigger brush. So by the time you've walked into the center of all of these brushes, you're going to have triggered all the sprites and all the noises on the detector. So that's the principle of it, that's how it works, that's how you make it. It gets taxing when you start doing things like putting it on events. So if I load up Ghost Hunt 3 for you, for example, oh my god, it takes ages. So this is our ghost. These are the ghosts that follow you around. It's probably the best example for this because I had crashes because of these guys. So it's a template NPC, and it's got all these other things attached to it, including the brushes that trigger the detector. Okay, now that's a lot of inputs and outputs. There's obviously a lot of brushes involved in that trigger, in that trigger array, if you will. So what happens is when we're spawning these little things all over the map, so if I mean, you can tell already that when you spawn the map itself, there's a lot of these little trigger brushes lying around, with things which trigger the detector in that way that I've just shown you, which is extremely taxing anyway. But when we trigger and spawn NPCs with these around, it just quickly fills up the edit counter on the map, and you crash it instantly. This was a really big challenge for me when it came to Ghost Hunt 3, because I think the ghost detector is quite integral to the map. It's quite cool. It's like the little feature of Ghost Hunt, which I'm quite proud of. So it's quite difficult to implement in that respect. It is taxing on the source engine. You can do all kinds of things with it though once you've got this base, because there's no renaming these triggers. All you're changing is the parent. So you can literally have, like, this is my test bed. You can literally have the test bed. You can dump the ghost detector into your map and copy and paste the triggers in. You could group this trigger array and then just parent it, which is dead easy. The other thing, the final thing that you want to do when you're setting up these triggers, make sure you put a filter on them, which basically what the filter does, it means you need to tell the triggers to only trigger when they're being touched by a physics object. But if you don't have a filter, they'll trigger when any physics object is touching them. So you create an activator name filter, which basically says by class name. So we named the detector and we say that only this physics object can interact with these trigger brushes, and then you won't get random physics props setting off your ghost events. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it was informative enough. I know it was really quick, but I think the best way at learning something like Hammer is to play around and teach yourself, because that's what I did. Okay, thanks for playing my maps, and I'll give you some more tutorials soon.